In this section, we're going to start to take a look at the early rise of a Roman Republic. And one of the key elements that your textbooks are probably going to highlight is that in many ways the Romans, as they're looking back into their history, they see some historical elements, but they also see some elements of tradition and genealogy and mythology, sort of like many of the ancient Hebrews or the other people within, say, Egyptian or Mesopotamian society thought of history as this idea of blending all those things together. But it's important here for a second because these are famous kind of ideas that are very powerful. And they're kind of heroic myths in the sense that the story of exactly what happened is probably not true. It wasn't like it happened, but it is used as an example of a showing of virtue or something powerful about Rome. Now, one of the first ones to talk about is Romulus. This is the legend of Romulus and his brother Remus, the two boys who are abandoned and are raised by a she-wolf and grow into the first settlers of Rome, and eventually in a property dispute, Romulus kills Remus. For some people, it has the same kind of aspect within the Judeo-Christian Islamic culture of Cain killing Abel, or other fratricide, murder and mayhem between brothers and families, and that the foundation myth of Rome is essentially based on a property dispute with a death in the mix. Kind of plants the seed that Rome is about, its struggles and about its ability to maintain itself. There's another famous myth in early Rome, it's the myth of Horatius. And here's the story. Rome is surrounded by enemies. It appears as if the enemies are going to enter into Rome across a bridge. Horatius rushes into the fray, pushes as many of the enemy aside, battles as best he can on the bridge, and invites all the other Romans behind him to chop down the bridge so that the enemy cannot enter into the city. They do that, and then he fights a little bit more and then jumps in the water and swims to the other side. All right? Now, on one level, I sometimes like to think of this, well, let's see here. He ordered public destruction of property, he incited a riot, and then in the face of the enemy, he ran away as a coward. No, that's not the way the myth should be interpreted. Look, Horatio took the initiative to save the city. If it meant chopping down the bridge, fine. If it meant destroying the enemy as best he could and throwing his body into the action, taking his duty on, fine. But then it would be pointless for him to die on the other side of the broken down bridge for no reason, and that's why he swims back to the other side. Once again, this idea of heroic virtue and doing what's necessary. Also within the heroic myth category is the myth of Lucretia. She is an early woman who is assaulted, taken captive, and raped by a proud king and his family and are rudely treating and very, very nasty to the Roman people. Her virtue is to report back what had happened to her and then to commit suicide so that there's no blemish on her family's understanding of who she was and what she was. But it's used as an example to show the brutality of having one person in charge, one king, one arrogant dictator kind of person. That is what Romans are going to react against, and the elite rally and take out the king. The last heroic myth to think about is the myth of Cincinnatus, right? Cincinnatus is a humble farmer. He's summoned to be the dictator of Rome, the one-time sort of short-term military leader. He has a several-month term. He comes, organizes the Romans, defeats the enemy, and instead of sticking around for the statues and the banquet in honor of him, resigns his office and goes back to his farm. Once again, the Roman idea here being that a man, like a good Stoic philosopher would say, do your duty, take on your tasks, do what's necessary for your society, and then when you're done, go back to your humble farm and get back to work. Those are the kind of myths that are very powerful in the Roman experience, and hopefully many of you will see at least some of these in the text that you're using for study in this exam. Another thing for us to point out about the early era of Rome is the creation of this idea of the father of the family. Now, the Latin term is pater familias, all right? And it essentially means the father of the family. The father of the family in Rome is absolute as a dictator. Controls the domestic household through his wife and his daughters and slaves, is sort of an absolute leader of the whole family, and everyone must defer to the father. The father figure is everything. This provides a very simple structure, a very predictable structure in Roman families where you always know who's making decisions and who's in charge. And the power of the paterfamilias is undeniable in terms of running the household, setting up domestic religious shrines, advocating who's going to marry whom and how and why. Everything goes to the father of the family as the all-powerful one, and we'll see that. Now here's a simple depiction of Romulus and Remus, the two abandoned boys being raised by the she-wolf. And you'll see this later on. This myth is going to come across in many different ways in Roman society. There's constant references back to it as this, foundation time. And it is also interesting to note that this is going to be sort of the symbol of a Roman rugged individualism, that the individual can triumph over virtually anything, and it's going to reinforce that sort of duty-bound understanding that we just talked about within the paterfamilias and Roman society in general. And you'll also see this because this will show up in many places as you start to take a look at the city of Rome, and it's going to be a very powerful image that's going to be used again and again. Now, the other things to focus on here for a second in understanding early development of the Roman Republic is that it is divided. There are people who are called patricians. Now, the patricians are essentially the old elite, the family members and descendants of famous politicians and military leaders, and people who used to serve in the Senate. And we'll be talking about this more closely when we talk about Roman political development. The Senate is essentially a group of elderly men who are the powerful members of families, landowning families, and the old elite of various kinds. They meet and essentially have, as a collective body, the most political power inside of Rome. There will be other political offices we'll talk about when we talk more closely about Roman government, but essentially the origins of control in this area of Rome is the senatorial class, this relatively closed group. It's an oligarchy, if we want to use the Greek term. It's a small group of people of interrelated families who share power and are in many ways the political leaders of all society. And in order to help protect themselves from ever having the sort of losing control or losing the monopoly of control they have over society, they erect several barriers to make sure that they cannot ever be intermarried with other groups. So, for example, while the patricians maintain themselves as a very exclusive elite, they are lording it over or controlling a vast number of plebeians, of working class people, and also within the plebeian group, there are people who are relatively wealthy, but since they are not descendants of some of the original powerful families, not connected to the Senate families that are running the show, they're kept at sort of a distance. They may have wealth, they may have some influence, they may have some power, but they do not have a direct political impact on Rome. They will, though, in time, be the group of people that will have the most control of Rome and are going to be the ones serving as the soldiers, especially the backbone of the Roman state will be the ability of its army to protect and expand Rome. We'll see in time that the large patrician class that is controlling the top and the even larger plebeian class at the bottom are not going to be in agreement about the future of how Rome should be organized, and the idea will be that you're going to see direct conflict between the two. Be sure to take a look at your reading materials, and of course, those sample questions will help you understand some of these key concepts.